and welcome once again to INSEAD's LeaderCast series. I'm Charles Galenick. Today we're fortunate to have with us Tex Gunning, the Managing Director of AkzoNobel's Decorative Paints business and a member of the Management Board. Mr. Gunning, welcome.
Thank you.
Social and environmental challenges are a big part of what you do in your executive role. Why is that? We don't often find business people that are so engaged in social and environmental issues. What in your life as a leader, as a business person, made you focus so much time and attention there?
I spent 15 years of my career in Asia. And in that period, particularly in Asia, we saw a massive explosion of population growth. And with that, of course, all the problems that come with it, whether it's poverty, whether it's malnutrition, whether it is diseases. In my 15 years period, I had 3 epidemics. So I think living there made me very conscious that this world, moving from 6 billion people to 9.5 billion people, all wanting to make economic progress, all having to be fed, all need water and energy, that was an unsustainable trajectory. And I also realized that business was so narrowly defined, focusing on shareholders' value, rather than take a much wider definition of saying, what's my role in society? I'm part of this society, and if this society is on an unsustainable route, I am on an unsustainable route. So I started to integrate a few things. That was what I saw in my private life, of course, what I saw in my business life. And I started to integrate that with the discussion about the role of business in society and say, look, business has to take responsibility. They have the power, they have the resources, they have the money, they have the competencies, they have the skills, they have all the business schools that educate us. And we have to, as business, take responsibility because governments seem to be unable to take that role.
But how do you get shareholders to listen? What message do you give to shareholders that this is also important for them?
It's very difficult because most companies don't have shareholders, right? They have investors. And these investors, they come and go and come and go. So if you would have true shareholders that would be in there for the long haul, I think they would realize that the ultimate shareholder value is being determined over longer periods than now. And if you look between now, 2010 and 2030, 20 years period is not a very long period where we will move to 8 billion people. For shareholders to continue to earn money on their investments, they better would pay attention to the challenges that we're all facing that will ultimately disrupt the value creation models that we had in the past. I think there's a major personal interest should be from shareholders. I think increasingly we will see shareholders that are not only shareholders but are also citizens, they're also fathers and mothers of children, and they start to realize that for them to sustain their own lives, their private lives, but also their economic lives, that business has to start integrating their social agenda with the economic agenda and the environmental agenda.
There are many social and environmental challenges facing the world. You just gave a presentation to our executive MBA class, and I'm struck by the list of all the issues. What in your estimation is a priority for the world? Where should we be spending more attention, more thought time, more resources to try to solve?
No, I'm very glad you asked that question because for years and years I have been a crusader, let's say, for child mortality, for child malnutrition, for poverty. And just over the last few months I started to say, no, I should really focus on climate change. Because if climate change is not resolved, then the poverty issue and all the other issues will only get worse and worse and worse. So my guess is that we, as businesses, should take a very proactive attitude. We should not wait for governments to come up with regulation. We should be doing what we have to do, and that is bring our footprints, particularly our CO2 equivalent footprints, down massively, and not invest in anything that isn't green, and spend an enormous amount of money of our research and development budgets on bringing up new technology to our products, new technology to logistics and supply chains, in order to get the climate change issue under control. I mean, if you realize that if the world would indeed warm up only by 3 or 4 degrees, which it seems it does, I mean, there's ample evidence for that, that most of the Amazon rainforest will disappear, which delivers 70% of the world's oxygen, If you see the flooding that's going on around the world, whether it's in the United States or whether it is in Europe nowadays, or whether it is in Manila or whether it's in Vietnam, I mean, a beautiful city like Hoi An, to see the Hoi An city entirely underwater, you realize that we have to be very quick. So my appeal is to the business people not to wait for regulation, not to lobby for delays and delays and delays, but to take a very responsible view and to say, with my business at least, I'm going to bring down anything that has to do with CO2 emissions and make sure that the carbon footprint comes down dramatically.
But why should we trust businesses, Tex? In the last year, we've seen financial institution decisions from years ago nearly bring down our economies. Financial meltdown and all the economic turmoil that's resulted from there. Regulatory issues there as well, but a lot of bad business models and business decisions. Based to some extent on incentives gone amok, incentives pulling people in the wrong direction and so on. Why should we trust business to solve some of these tremendously important issues?
I would not sit backwards and trust business to come up with this from themselves. So we need people like educators like yourself. We need leaders like me that stand up. There are enough other people who are genuinely conscious and concerned about what's happening to the world. And we have to become advocates and activists on this. We can't sit back and hope that business leaders that are indeed under pressure of shareholders or are indeed under a certain script believing that this is not the role of business or that this can be postponed any longer. We have to become activists. We have to make sure we make charters at national level. The UK signed a charter, the businesses in the UK. I hope in the Netherlands we can find enough people to sign a charter that we will bring down the greenhouse gas emissions massively. And we have to be activists here, really activists.
So what about AkzoNobel? Large chemical company, one of the largest in the world. When I think of chemical companies, I don't think of the greenest organizations around. So this must play a big part in how you do business as well. What is AkzoNobel doing in this space to make the world a better place?
Now, AkzoNobel is extremely concerned about the climate change issue, and we have a very aggressive agenda developed to bring down our greenhouse gas emissions. As I said earlier to you during lunch, we're going to spend at least 30, but probably more, 40% of our research and development budget on bringing down the inconvenient truth of our products and of our whole supply chain. This is a massive technological challenge, but I've seen the first proposals, and you'd be amazed how creative people become and how optimistic people are about the fact that we can bring down our inconvenient truth. To make this more tangible, we have put the top of AkzoNobel, all the top leaders of AkzoNobel, on a different performance bonus scheme. The classic scheme, of course, is that 100% of your long-term incentive bonus is dependent on shareholders' value rankings. We now have changed that. We have agreed with our shareholders, which is interesting in itself, that 50% of our long-term incentive bonus will be dependent on shareholders' value creation, and 50% will be dependent on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index.
Where you do reasonably well at the moment.
We do well, and maybe that makes it easier for our top to accept it, but the beauty of, if everybody would commit itself to make its incentive scheme dependent on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, you will see that there will be massive competition about the ranking in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And then, of course, we get a recalibration of the scores, and that will ultimately drive a better climate change agenda.
So, but you'll have to then run faster just to stay in the same place. Well, what's the incentive, though? Isn't the incentive to increase your ranking in the index? In which case, if you're already quite high, how else do you measure that? I mean, what's the incentives for the executives? Is it to stay in the same place, or you're in the top 5, I believe, right now?
Yeah, we're in the top 3. But obviously, and that's why I'm saying, the more people participate, the more crowded it will become, because we're not scoring 100 out of 100. We're scoring 54 out of 100 on some issues. Surely we're going to get competition on that 54, and some people will score 70. And what I've seen is the moment that this becomes part of people's package incentive schemes, they pay attention to all these scores. And they really say, okay, I want to see a program on this, I want to see a program on that, I want to see a program on that. I mean, it's not very idealistic to link this to performance pay, but I think it's a very good development if more companies would commit themselves to the Dow Jones Sustainability Index.
Okay, so you actually get quite surgical and look at the specific measures.
Very surgical.
And measure
very
people on
surgical.
That, right? Not just
line
the
item by line item, score by score, see who your competitors are, measure it, what is the program behind it. So you do all the classical management things. That is, says, look, to get the score up, what do we have to do? How can we measure it? How can we ultimately make this tangible for everybody? And you get a classic management approach to these things.
So traditionally, managers and executives, they paid great lip service to this. They would say this is important. They would build sustainability. They'd call them sustainability programs. But when you scratch beneath the surface, you didn't get the sense, or at least not always in my experience, that it was authentic, that people genuinely believed in the purposes behind these and wanted to see it happen. Shareholder value still was quite prominent. And I can see it changing in your measures. What about in the minds of the executives and the people lower down your organization? How are you cascading this through? How are you getting the message so that people don't see this as just another corporate scheme that's fundamentally tied to shareholder wealth and ultimately, but it's about something broader in terms of the company's purpose, their purpose, and so on?
Well, I think increasingly, obviously, citizens and employees are citizens, and consumers are citizens, and customers are citizens, become conscious about the climate change agenda. I think what they were looking for is leadership. They're looking for leaders that are able to articulate the challenge, to translate the challenge to daily actions that we can all take, and then ultimately help them to implement that. Now, at AkzoNobel, we have a sustainability director. It starts with that, so there's a person responsible for it. We've calculated our inconvenient truth, so it's cast in stone. This is our inconvenient truth. This has to come down, despite that we will hopefully grow increasingly, of course, in the next 5 to 10 years. We've aligned our research and development budget. We have a group of young leaders to challenge us. We sent a group of young leaders to Antarctica to see what was happening there. They came back. They now become the internal challenges to keep us all honest. We've linked it to the ultimate thing, pay. I think we come up with a kind of comprehensive program that ultimately I don't think is going to change anything. In the sense, it's going to be systemic change ultimately, and this agenda item is not going to disappear anymore.
And you also, you didn't call it sustainability. Your campaign is An Inconvenient Truth, which is Al Gore's movie. Was this part of the campaign as well internally? I mean, is it consciously linking it to a media theme, a movie in the visible world?
I think that the word inconvenient truth we got to make very conscious, rather than this is Al Gore's word, Al Gore's film title. The reality is, as a business, there is something terribly truthful, which is terribly inconvenient. That is, we do business whilst we are emitting greenhouse gases that ultimately create climate change and that ultimately create the disasters that we're already seeing. So to call it the truth and to call it this is massively inconvenient, but we have to solve this internally is, I think, the right thing of doing it. I have to say, though, that not everybody found it, how do you say this, convenient that we call it the inconvenient truth. Some of my colleagues didn't like it. They said, look, that is not a nice title to work with. Why not sustainability? And I think the more people say that they don't like it, the more I would like to emphasize it and keep it alive, because it is inconvenient. It is very inconvenient. The truth can be very inconvenient, and I think we should call it the inconvenient truth. We should manage it. We should invest in it. In our capital proposals, you realize many people say by 2030, by 2040, by 2050, we should have achieved this and achieved that. But if you look at the life cycles of factories and the life cycles of offices, they have life cycles of 30, 40, 50 years. So we have said every single investment that we approve today has to be green, has to start using thermal energy, has to start using sun energy, has to start using recycled water, etc., and make sure that there is no contribution further to CO2 emissions or equivalents of that.
So are you a black swan? How many other leaders that you talk to outside of AkzoNobel and in the broader community, I mean, how many of them do you feel get this message, feel as strongly about these issues as you do?
I must say I don't know. Of course, I meet a lot of people, and the climate change agenda is well known to everybody, so it's not that people are evading the subject, but how many people are actually in their daily lives align their investment strategies, their research and development strategies, their marketing strategies to say, look, enough is enough, we're going to put a line in the sand, because this is really about the sustainability of life on Earth. This is not about economic discussions, this is about life. And therefore, as I asked one of my guys who came up with an investment proposal that was 25% higher and was greener, I said to the guy, do I have a choice? And the guy said, no, you don't. I said, well, then you know the answer to this capital proposal. It's approved. And that's how we should think. We should draw a line in the sand. We should say enough is enough. We're going to go green. We're going to really invest in the future of our children.
Tex Getting, I wish you much success, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you too.